I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we mark the 6-month anniversary of the Kursk offensive, talk about how Russian spies may be involved in bombings at Ukrainian army recruitment offices, and we discuss how politicians in Ukraine have quietly been pushing their profiles, looking ahead to potential elections at the end of the war.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
It's the worst carnage that this world has seen since World War II.
Absolutely fascinating.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Thursday, the 6th of February. 2 years and 342 days since the full-scale invasion began. Today I'm joined by Dom Nicholls, Associate Editor for Defence.
Well, hello, Adélie. Hello, everybody. 6 months. 6 months to the day, folks, that Ukraine invaded Russia, and they're still there. No move on the ground there again over the last 24 hours. That continues the pattern of recent weeks. You've got to go back to the first week of January, really, for the last significant move there, and that's significant with a very small S. That was when Russia/North Korean troops moved into the northwest, or took a chunk out of the northwest lodgement of Ukrainian troops inside Russia. That's the northwest of Suja. But yeah, 6 months for all the chat that we hear from Putin about they'll be out by October, and then it'll be Christmas, and then it's, well, whatever. You know, I've said before, if they are still there on May the 9th, Victory Day, so-called, in Russia, that will be, well, it will coincide probably with the millionth Russian casualty, and that will be very significant. So watch that space, but you can watch the space for a long time, but there's not a lot moving there. Staying in Russia, and last night Ukraine struck the Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield in Russia's Krasnodar Krai area with drones. So that's halfway up the eastern coast of the Sea of Azov. In a statement, Ukraine's General Staff said, confirmed hit and explosions in the target area. A fire has broken out. The results of the hit are being clarified. That's the only response to it that I've seen. No comment from Russian MOD. Now, that airfield is said to be a key launch site for a lot of Russia's drones, as well as being a storage, training and maintenance facility for fixed-wing aircraft as well, operating over Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. In Ukraine, attacks yesterday across the centre and the east of the country mainly saw very reduced civilian casualty figures, thankfully. Only 1 death and 24 injuries reported. Remarkable how low that is. Obviously, too many, but still amazing that it's that level. And also amazing that that was with 77 drones being launched by Russia, 56 of them shot down across 9 oblasts, 18 others landed without damage. And as I said yesterday, that it's interesting that they are still firing so many, quote-unquote, empty, if you like, drones that have not got a warhead, speaks of potential problems in their munitions side of the aerial capability. However, there was shelling and other aerial strikes. They caused the damage and the deaths across the country. No move across the front lines, really, to speak of in any way at all. And on that, US-based media company Malcontent News posted something on Twitter last night. They'd done some research. They said that the number of Russian assaults has steadily declined for the last 53 days. They put out a graph showing the number of attacks across the country inside Ukraine. It's been steadily going down. They say Tuesday's report of 85 assaults, that's 12 in Kursk, 73 in Ukraine, was the lowest number since the 9th of June last year, when it was assessed that Russia had entered an operational pause. Now, Malcontent News say this is not down to poor weather, because it's not been particularly cold. It's not frozen the ground too much, and the weather has not precluded aerial activity. They say airstrikes are close to record levels again. However, they do say that Russia is starting to use what they call the end of the offensive playbook, i.e. intentional targeting of civilians over energy infrastructure. We're thinking, what's happening down in Kherson with that human safari, and a lot of chat from the Russian Mill blog community about the whole, we're fighting NATO, we're up against everybody, blah, blah, blah. So that's good that the number of daily attacks coming down. There's been a commensurate reduction in daily casualty figures. More on that in a moment. But, the counter to that, obviously, is that Ukraine has not been able to take advantage of that. There's been no major Kharkiv thrusts like we saw towards the back end of 2022. It all speaks of a lack of numbers, a lack of capability, a lack of morale. I'm not just some unalloyed good news here. Hey, Russian attacks are down. I'm trying to give you the whole picture. Now, Ukraine, possibly as a result of that, numbers, capability, morale, and so on, Ukraine has announced changes to its military structure. You may have seen General Syrsky speaking on Monday, who said that reform of the armed forces organisational structure is ongoing, and we've begun implementing measures to transition to a corps-based structure. So core is one of the bigger building blocks of a military capability. If you think of a platoon of sort of standard infantry stuff, platoon of 30 fighters, a company which makes about 100-ish, 3 platoons and a headquarters as a company, then a battalion, 400 or 500-ish, 3 or 4 battalions making up a brigade, 3 or 4 brigades making up a division, and 2, 3, 4, depending on role, divisions making up a corps. So a corps is a big old bit of the Lego, but if you go for that corps structure, and Mick Ryan's very good on this, the former Australian general. He's put out a piece this week talking about it. He says that corps can be a very effective way of applying military force because they're that next level of coordination, efficiency and operational planning if they get it right. He posits Gulf War I when the US-led forces went into Iraq with 3 corps. That's what it took. A big old beast, can be very unwieldy, but if you get it right, it can be very effective. Now, as I say, those attacks are down, but the casualty level's not dipped that much. Yesterday's MOD tweet reiterated that January's average Russian casualty figure was 1,556 casualties a day. And as we've reported, they said January last month was the second highest month for casualties for Russia since the start of the full-scale invasion, with December 2024 being the highest. A high amount of people being involved and being injured, but a smaller number of overall attacks. So slowing down but speeding up, if that doesn't overcomplicate things, which it probably does. But what it does for me, it indicates this reliance, Russia's reliance on infantry-led human wave meat assaults. They've got nothing else in the locker. They are just launching these assaults that are dwindling in number, but the casualty rates for each of those are staying about the same. Right, let's get the hell away from the maths. Russian spies have been blamed for a series of bombings at Ukrainian army recruitment offices. This has been doing the rounds just lately. Didn't really know what to make of it. However, we think that this report today sort of tries to put a wrapper around it. There was an explosion at a draft centre on Wednesday in western Ukraine. That killed 1 person, wounded 4 others. That was the latest in a string of such incidents in recent weeks. Today, Ivan Vinivsky, who's Ukraine's national police chief, said, "We clearly understand, together with the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, that this is a specific attack by the special services of the Russian Federation to destabilise the situation." Speaking of the attack on Wednesday, he said a man had approached the Kamenets-Podilsky District Territorial Centre, that's right over in the west of the country, about 20 k's north of the border with Moldova, approached the centre on Wednesday, clutching a bag, asking to hand over a package, which then exploded and caused all the casualties. Mr. Vinivsky said that there have been 9 such attacks orchestrated by Russian intelligence forces already this year. Now, also on Wednesday, Ukrainian police announced that they detained 3 men accused of attacking a recruitment centre in Pavlograd. So that's centre of the country, about 40 k's east of Dnipro. They say that was carried out on Russian orders as well. They say the suspects were recruited via messenger and promised a monetary reward for committing the crime. The police, they carried on, they said, on the instructions of their Russian handler, the traitors manufactured explosives and detonated them near the object he had designated. Separately and related to all this, last Saturday, 1 person was killed and 6 wounded by an explosive device at a military draft centre up in the northwest of the country near Rivne. Earlier that day, a man with a hunting rifle had shot dead a Ukrainian army recruitment soldier and escaped with a conscript before they were both or he was hunted down by the police. So a lot going on there suggests that there's an orchestrated campaign. It's against the backdrop of this morale issue that I've mentioned. There were some suggestions that maybe these recruitment centres were being targeted by Ukrainian men not wanting to be drafted. I think that idea was largely debunked as the casualties started to be accrued, and certainly with deaths. And now it's the national police chief, Mr. Vinivsky, saying actually it's Russian intelligence operatives behind it all. Yesterday, there was a prisoner exchange mediated by the UAE, United Arab Emirates. 150 from both sides were swapped. No further details known about that. And on the politics front, or the Mill-Pole side, Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey, he's going to convene the next Ukraine Defence Contact Group, often called the Ramstein Group. This one's going to be in person, so not a virtual job. No Zoom here. You're on mute, John. This is going to be in person at NATO HQ in Brussels next Wednesday, the 12th. That's going to be the 26th Ukraine Defence Contact Group, Ramstein Group, and going to take place just ahead of a NATO Defence Ministerial meeting. I'm going to offer some thoughts about that in the final thoughts today. Now, sticking with the British government, and more details have emerged about the £55 million in financial support from the UK that Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced yesterday during his visit to Kyiv. So from the new financial package, we're told 17 million quid will go on innovative energy projects, £10 million to help the recovery of businesses, and 25 million to support family and community services. That was in a statement from the British Foreign Office. Now, on his visit, Mr. Lammy said, "We will continue to stand alongside you to fight this imperialism that we're seeing from Putin until the very end." And I guess that's a variation on for as long as it takes. He said, "It is still our assessment that Putin shows no desire to negotiate at all at this point in time." Chris O, on Twitter, an independent military history author and researcher. He's a regular defence commentator on X on Twitter, seen as a credible source. He says that Russian sources are reporting a mass deactivation of Starlink terminals along the length of the front line in Ukraine. Now, there's speculation that this has been ordered by Elon Musk or Donald Trump. It's not clear whether this is just Russians affected or maybe Ukrainians as well. Starlink, you'll remember, is widely used by the Ukrainian military, largely through funding provided by the Biden administration. There's a question mark over whether or not the Trump administration will continue such funding. But the Russians have also acquired Starlink terminals mainly on the black market through third countries. Now, Chris speculates that Starlink has been able to identify these black market terminals and deactivate them somehow, to deactivate them remotely without affecting the Ukrainian side. Alternatively, it might be a deliberate act by the company, acting on the orders of or the direction of Musk or Trump, perhaps, in order to weaken the ability of both sides to conduct military operations and push them towards peace negotiations. We simply don't know. But if you are on the front, if you are at the front, if you're near the front using Starlink, have a comment on this, please do let us know. ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. Completely anonymous, gives a view, be interesting to know. And finally, Adélie, the first French Mirage 2000/5 fighter jets have turned up in Ukraine, pledged by Emmanuel Macron last year. So French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu, speaking this morning, announced that the jets are in country, the training's been done, the pilots are good to go. I presume the whole logistic chain is ready as well, otherwise he wouldn't have said it. No further details known, as you'd expect. We don't know if they've been in service yet, but I think you've donned your trickle out and you've probably got a little bit more on that in the next few minutes. And that's us up to date, Adélie.
Thanks, Dom, and I do have more on the Mirages indeed. As you said, Sébastien Lecornu, France's defence minister, announced this morning on X that the first Mirage 2005 fighter jets promised by France last June had arrived in Kyiv. So that number is still unspecified, and the deal also included a training program for Ukrainian pilots. So I decided to go back to that announcement last June. Back then, Le Monde had reported that the fighter jets were part of a greater cooperation deal between France and Ukraine that included the training of troops in France. That's the Anne of Kyiv Brigade, and we all know how that's gone. These jets are coming to strengthen air defence, especially in the region of Kharkiv, which is under constant aviation threat. We report on that regularly in the podcast. Now, a little bit of background information. France has 26 of these Mirages, most of them based in southeastern France. The others are spread out around the globe, and one of the questions is, where is France taking these fighter jets from in order to deliver them to Ukraine? Some of them are reinforcing NATO's eastern flank. A few regularly take part in NATO's enhanced air policing mission, which involves deterring Russian aircraft from venturing into the Euro-Atlantic airspace. 4 aircrafts were deployed in Lithuania in November 2023 and 2 in Sweden in February 2024. There were also, on the other side of the globe, 60 of these aircrafts that were delivered to Taiwan. It's also worth noting that back in June, Le Monde was pretty sceptical about whether delivering these aircrafts were pertinent in the current context. The piece pointed out that it was unclear how useful these Mirages were going to be for Ukrainian forces, simply because they required their own logistical chains, maintenance personnel, pilots. There was added pressure on resources that were already pretty sparse. And that could hinder the deployment of F-16s. Le Monde also pointed out that that was why Sweden hadn't provided any of its Gripen aircrafts. If you have any further thoughts on that, please let us know. I also want to talk today about another very interesting article in Le Monde from their correspondent in Ukraine, Thomas Distria. Le Monde has excellent coverage of Ukraine and they do translate most of their work in English, so make sure you check it out. Thomas Distria wrote about the unofficial presidential campaign underway in Ukraine at the moment and the simmering of Ukrainian politics ever since negotiations seem to be looming closer and closer on the horizon. Now, that's something we all know that Putin has been using against Zelensky in the recent international exchange of jibes over who's going to sit at the negotiation table and on what terms. Putin has called the Ukrainian president illegitimate over and over again, most recently a couple of weeks ago, and Zelensky responded lengthily to this comment in his interview with Piers Morgan this week. It's worth noting that while the population generally supports the elections being postponed, Zelensky's popularity ratings have been falling quite drastically over the winter. They were at 52% in December 2024, down from 77% a year earlier, and that's according to the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. But back to Le Monde's report. Thomas Distria, the foreign correspondent, followed the former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko near the front line in Izium, where he was meeting troops and delivering drones, Starlink antennas, whether they work or not is another story, and generators. That's part of raising his profile among fighters and across the country. He claims that he's meeting 10 brigades every week when he's not sitting in the Rada in Kyiv or travelling abroad and meeting Western leaders. Poroshenko has made no secret of his ambitions, even though his popularity is still pretty low. The same goes for Vitaly Klitschko, the current mayor of Kyiv, who has spent New Year's Eve on the front line meeting the soldiers, which is obviously a way of supporting the armed forces, but also showing off alongside the soldiers for photo ops and the like. Le Monde also reports that the Ukrainian media has seen an uptick of activity from Ukraine's political leaders in recent weeks, requesting opinion polls, for example. On January 27th, the influential news website Ukrainska Pravda noted a reawakening of, I quote, the dormant Ukrainian political process. Old and new players are gradually becoming active in search of new voters, new communications channels, and new teams. Now, talking about new communication channels, Yuri Boryko, the former leader of the now banned pro-Russian party, has kept a low profile since the beginning of the invasion. But in December, he blasted Ukrainian radicals on TikTok for banning Russian-speaking citizens from speaking the language and denounced the recent ban on the activities of the Orthodox Church linked to the Moscow Patriarchate. There have been consequences to that take. The Ukrainian security service summoned Yuri Boryko and have removed his title of Hero of Ukraine. But clearly, it's simmering left and right. I'll post the link to that long read in the show notes as usual. When we were in Ukraine in November, Francis and I visited the demining headquarters of Irpin. It's located in the local town hall and run by emergency personnel, deminers, policemen and the like. It's a vast room with a wall covered with screens. That's how the team monitors the city and finds out where drones fall or mines are discovered by civilians and how they want to respond to the emergency. We visited it on the 1,000th day of the full-scale invasion in November, and as we were walking towards the town hall, an air alarm rang.
This is the end of the alert.
In there, we sat down with Vladislav Voloshin, an operator for underwater drones and one of these team members, who told us how the headquarters operate.
Після цього черговий передає.
Basically, you can see there is a person that is on shift here. These people are receiving requests when somebody needs some area to be demined. And the first thing that this person that is on guard should do is to make sure that the other person that is standing near the hazardous ordnance is psychologically stable, is able to move away from the projectile or any other hazardous ordnance. Then the person on the phone gathers information about any potential hazard, and then it triggers and launches all of other processes. Then the head of the group decides what to be done next, how many people should be in the group, when they should go to a specific spot to demine, whether they need to go there. We've got a lot of channels for information transmitting. We keep in touch with all of the institutions and critical infrastructure institutions so that it would be possible for us to react as quickly as possible if something happens.
So if, let's say, a missile came down or another piece of dangerous ordnance, they get the call here, and then immediately you decide how many to send out. How quickly would you aim to get to the site to perhaps do something?
Якщо це ракета, підіймаються усі наявні сили.
So the first thing to be done is, we receive the call and we have to head there as quickly as possible in case if the missile or a drone just fell down there. Why is it so? Because not a single other service can reach there without our yes. You can go there because we have to demine everything. There might be stuff that fell down and did not detonate, so we have to make sure that nobody gets hurt once they go there.
Would that be true? So imagining a situation where a drone or a missile has landed, somebody has been injured. Do they need to go in first before the emergency services can help treat that person?
Але для розуміння ось дві найпоширеніші ситуації. Перша ситуація.
So you can imagine there are two situations that we deal with. For instance, the situation is when a person is calling and says, "Okay, I have found a grenade." So we understand that there is a person, there is a grenade, and we are going to head there as soon as possible. But if the person is calling and says, "I saw something somewhere in the forest. There is some sort of a missile. I don't know what, I don't know where." So we just prioritize what should be done next. If we have to do there, or if we should go there a little bit later because there is no specific coordinates of the spot where this potential hazard is. So these are different types of situations. It depends on what we receive from the person calling us.
You must be doing this every day since the full-scale invasion. Is it something that you ever get used to? Or is this something that still feels as shocking to you as it did 3 years ago?
Спочатку це, напевно, страшно, але страшно.
You have to understand that initially when you start doing this job, you have fear. But the fear lies in the fact that you don't really know what to do. Once you get this experience, once you realize and once you have this practice, you don't have this fear because basically this humanitarian demining is quite safe if you know what to do.
І додає ще, коли ти знімаєш там першу міну.
The more work you do, the more you have this realization of the fact that you're doing something really important. For instance, once you demine one mine, you understand, I might have saved someone. When you demine 100th mine, you understand, I suppose that I have saved someone. But once you do it for the 1000th time, you're definitely sure that you have saved somebody's life for sure.
Do you have any specific example that you can think of a missile, a grenade, a piece of ordnance which you've stopped and you know has saved lives?
Дуже багато ситуацій, скажімо так, міна точно.
You have to understand that once you say mine and it hasn't detonated, it will definitely do at some point. I remember there were two situations when we had to demine two pianos, and one of these piano was in a child's bedroom, and I really realized that basically it was that.
It had been booby-trapped by Russian soldiers?
Тобто це російські солдати, які влаштували там, що це було? Можете писати трішки?
Нас викликає жіночка, всі квартири в окупації.
I remember when I was drinking some coffee with the rescue servicemen, we were getting prepared for the next day, prioritizing our duties, and then I remember it was already late, and then we received this call from that woman. She lived in an area that was completely under the Russian occupation. She was cleaning her apartment, And she said that she assumed that the piano was mined with some sort of ordnance because she saw some print of a palm right on top of it, because everything was dusted and this is the only spot that had this palm print. So she decided to call, and what we found there was a grenade from a grenade launcher attached inside of a piano. And the cynicism of it lies in the fact that it was attached in the way that once a child sits to play, the only movement of this hammer inside of a piano would cause the detonation. And it's quite clear that this is the kids' room. There were a lot of, awards and a lot of toys inside of that room. It's clear that this room belongs to a kid, and still the piano was mined by the Russians.
How did that make him feel when he was told that?
Ну, напевно, це злість до росіян, до окупанта.
So, the thing that I felt was anger. It was enormous anger because, I could not realize how anyone being called human can do this kind of stuff. There is no humanity about that. But the second thing was the realization that I just made sure for who they really were, and there is no justifications for such actions. And I was really disappointed, not just in the Russians, but generally in humanity, that somebody living on this planet can do such things.
Then, we sat down with Natalia Kirkina, one of the deminers. She's originally from the east of Ukraine and had to flee her home in 2014. Now, she's retrained as a deminer and works in Irpin. She tells us about her journey and her work.
Natalia, we're sitting in the centre, the nerve centre of the municipal guard, and we're looking around us at the cameras of missiles coming in. This is, of course, somewhere that's very familiar to you, not only due to your work now, but due to your previous experience in the police. Tell me about your story, your life up to this point.
Раніше я проживала в місті Луганськ.
I lived in Luhansk until 2014, until the day when the Russians came and occupied the territory. So I worked for police. When the Russians came there, we decided to evacuate with our family here to the Bucha region, to our aunt. I left everything there, my house, my cat, my dog, so everything, my previous life was there. And then when I arrived here, started looking for a job and joined the police of this region. When I started working here and cooperating with the municipal guard, I already knew that there was municipal guard here and interacted with police hugely. The locals started saying that I was not from Luhansk, that I was local as well. They could not tell that I was from somewhere else. Initially it was pretty hard for us even to find an apartment to live in because, local people were a little bit cautious since we were from the eastern part of Ukraine. And this was the reason, so we didn't feel that comfortable. But then everything changed after the full-scale war started. Like people, they got used to the fact that there are refugees here in the country, and they started treating everybody else in a quite different way.
She described some of the skepticism from locals here when she moved from the eastern regions. How did that manifest itself?
Спочатку ми там всі розмовляли тільки.
So now when I arrived here, I spoke Russian because everybody spoke Russian back there in 2014 in the east of Ukraine. I started speaking Ukrainian only when I arrived here in this region. And I remember when I was trying to find a house to rent, to live in here, the first thing the owner of that house just did was looking into my passport. Originally I was from Luhansk, and she said that she was not going to give her a chance to live in that house because of her origin.
But then, as you say, the war has changed that. Can you just summarize through your own experience the way in which the full-scale invasion has changed attitudes and united people in the country?
Дуже об'єднала, тому всім стало зрозуміло, як це покинути свою домівку.
The full-scale war just united people here very much. The reason of this is that they realized that they are going through just the same thing that we were going through back in 2014. For you to understand, my mother was left there in Luhansk and she was dying from cancer. I could not even attend her burial because I'm a police officer and I just did not have this chance to go there because the Russians would have got me and thrown me into a basement. So she died there without me. I could not visit even her grave there. When the full-scale war started, people here in Irpin realized that everybody can become a refugee. A lot of them fled the country country and live in other countries all around the globe. Basically, they're just the same, just like I am and just like I was back in 2014. The only difference is that I cannot go back home to Luhansk because my home is occupied, and they cannot go back to Irpin because their home is destroyed. This is the only difference. Besides, there are a lot of people from other southern and eastern regions of Ukraine who just arrived here in Bucha and Irpin, from Kherson region, from the Zaporizhia region. So basically, the locals realized that there are a lot of Ukrainians out there, and there are a lot of people coming here from Ukraine, and all of us are Ukrainians.
Obviously, Irpin was one of the places that saw the most violence from the Russians when the full-scale invasion began. Has that contributed to the particular friendship that you've been offered as somebody who has experienced what you've experienced in the East?
Ну, зі мною особисто зміни відбулися, тому що я гарно комунікую з людьми.
I got a little bit of a different story of my own when I arrived here. Since I'm a very good communicator, I managed to establish great connections with local people. So basically, it took me just 1 year for them to realize that I'm one of them. Unlike other people from Donetsk and Luhansk regions who managed to came here but did not get the same attitude as I received from the locals. This is just owing to my communicator skills. I think that there is one thing that I can highlight that basically influenced locals here and their attitude towards me and my family is that from day one we started to work. We did not live using state's financial support. We started to live and work from day one. I think this is the crucial thing that influenced them and their attitude towards me and my family.
Thank you. The reason I ask is that quite often conversations around identity in Ukraine are very simplified, and I think your story is very interesting for the nuances that it shows. But we are, as I say, in the municipal centre here. Tell me about why you're interested in and particularly passionate about ordnance and preventing people from being harmed by ordnance. Tell me about your father.
Ну, коли ми зайшли в Ірпінь, тут перше, що потрібно було розбирати.
When I came back to Irpin after the town was liberated, I realized how much work should be done here because everything was just, piled up with this metal that could be potentially hazardous. There were a lot of guys whom we helped with finding these ordnances, but at that time, when I was helping the sappers, I realized that my jigsaw puzzle in my head, just everything was put together. My father, I recall him telling me this story about his palm. I remember asking him what happened to his palm because it was crippled for his entire life. And he told me a story that when he was a young boy, he ran upon some metal element that was laying on the ground. He picked it up and it just exploded. It was a very tiny thing. As it turned out, it was a grenade detonator and it exploded and hurt him a lot. It happened 12 years after the World War II, and I realized that just the same thing can happen to any other kid who is running around Irpin. And then I decided to learn more, to study more, to dive deeper into this subject, and that scared me even more because I realized how dangerous everything is in fact. So this is how I came to this, and this is how I realized that I want to make this place much safer for my kids and for kids of other people here in Irpin.
So tell me what her day-to-day life looks like working on that area.
Звичайно, я працюю з паперами, але більшість.
The greater part of my daily job is connected to paperwork. But sometimes we got the calls when we have to arrive to the spot and try to identify what is found there. So I worked as an ordnance identificator. Since I know how every potential hazard looks like, I can tell whether it's a dangerous one or not. So very often these calls are false calls, but I have to do it first because all of other guys, the sappers, are just piled up with other calls, more significant ones. So first of all, I have to go there and make sure that they should or should not go there. So this is what I figure out. There were a lot of situations when, we just arrived to the place and the thing that was found was something like, these electronic cigarette thrown away by others, and they're like blinking and people getting scared because they think that might be something dangerous, but in fact it is not. But sometimes we find something really dangerous. This is when I definitely have to identify what is found. This is how my daily work looks like.
There must be particular risks, though, being the first on the scene. Does she ever get frightened by what she sees in front of her.
Ви знаєте, страх появляється, коли ти розумієш, що це, наскільки воно небезпечно.
You are not scared until you realize how scary it is in fact. When I started learning, the more information I got, the more scared I become. Once you start realizing that your kids can get hurt and that anybody who lives here can get hurt, you want to share this information with as many people as possible. This is the reason why we conduct these trainings at schools for kids, how to identify the dangers. Because, when you don't know this information, you can just run around the forest or run around your own apartment, and you don't have this basic information you have to use to prevent any danger from hurting you. This is how I got scared, because I didn't know and I didn't realize it myself. For instance, I remember a situation when we got a call from a woman who arrived here, who came back to Irpin after the territory was liberated. She lived here for more than 1 year, some 1 year and a half, and then she got the information that there were sappers here working with us, and she decided to call because she found some strange hole in the ground right near the threshold to her home. She did not know what it actually was, and she ignored it for quite a long period of time. After she called, we identified a non-detonated ordnance, so basically it was potentially hazardous. So it was so deep in the ground that this is the reason why she did not understand what it actually was. So she could not realize what the hole was from and what made this hole in the ground. And the woman lived there for more than 1 year, like just ignoring this hole in the soil.
It could have gone off at any time. As you say, it's scary to do the work that you do, but it's scarier to think of those kind of scenarios and the worst that could happen. I have one final question, if I may, which is, it's the 1,000th day of war today as we record this interview, and your life shows how long this war has been going on, for far longer than just the 3 years, but since 2014. How do you feel about those who are talking at the moment about negotiations and the war ending in quite a short period of time?
Я розумію, що всім хочеться, щоб скоріше закінчилась війна. І мені більше...
Everybody wants the war to come to an end as soon as possible. But when I hear, the statement that we can give up some territories, I am very sad about this. Why? Because it means that if Ukraine gives up any piece of its territories, including Luhansk, I will never have a chance to attend the grave of my own mother. I will never have this chance to go there because, in the first place, I'm a police officer, so the Russians won't let me do that. And you have to understand that I am not the only one. There are a lot of people just like me. So when we speak about end of the war, I don't want to give up any territories of Ukraine.
Tak. Дякую.
Будь ласка.
Now for our final thoughts. Dom, over to you.
Yeah, well, my two final thoughts, I suppose, Adélie. First is I'm definitely going to check those links out because you put the fear of God into me just then. If I don't do it, who knows what will happen. Secondly, Ramstein next week and the whole Kursk thing. I think there's a number of bits and pieces going on now. So 6 months Ukraine's been inside Russia. And as I said, we heard from Putin that they were going to be out by October, then out by Christmas. And, it's all hogwash, as we know. It dials right into that argument about escalation. Every time there was, some new capability for Ukraine, Russia would go, escalation, nuclear, etc., etc. And we've rehearsed that argument many, many times about how the Biden administration chose to manage the argument about provocation and escalation. That's not what I'm going to go into now. However, I think it's very interesting that next Wednesday will be the first Ramstein meeting where Pete Hegseth is there in person, the new US Defense Secretary. It will be very interesting to get the first signs from him about the US administration's attitude to risk and escalation and whether or not they stare at Putin and this Russian administration that goes on about all these things and says it'll do X, Y, and Z if we do A, B, or C, says it'll be out of Ukraine will be out of Kursk in a few weeks and isn't. If they stare at them and say, you're full of hot air, this is a very dangerous situation, but we're going to be slightly less cautious than the last administration. Perhaps. I don't know. I'm just looking forward to next week. I think that'll be very telling. And as it's in NATO HQ in Brussels, we should make sure we get the bearded wonder, Joe Barnes, down there to have a look. But yes, that's definitely one to watch for next week. Thanks, Adélie. I'm going off to check those links.
Thanks, Dom. My final thought for today is another recommendation, so another link in the show notes. Apologise for the pressure on everyone, but it's a lovely, if very sombre, documentary called East Piano on BBC Three. It's made by John Object, an infantry soldier. That's his stage name, sorry, I should start with that. He is a Ukrainian musician, now infantry soldier on the front lines. And he's made this lovely documentary called East Piano about what it's like being a musician on the front lines, about recording the sounds of war, about not being able to listen to music when you're on the front lines because you might miss out on some critical noises that could potentially save your life, like a bomb falling on your head or artillery. It's also about finding a piano in Bakhmut and reconnecting with this past civilian life of his, and how music can both save you, keep you sane, and connect with that other part of yourself when your life has been taken over by war as a soldier. It's really moving, it's really artfully done, and I highly recommend you check it out. It's very different to the sort of Ukraine news we put out on this podcast. So a bit of like a sidestep for me today, but it's really beautiful. I really encourage you to check it out. Another pressure to check out the links in the show notes. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, or Foreign Affairs newsletter, bringing stories from award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on X, formerly known as Twitter, so that you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine, the latest, as soon as it is released, do refer to the podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review. It really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can also get in touch directly with us to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.